Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. In the month of January, I ended up finishing 6 books, and it was a pretty good reading month. It was a little bit rocky there for a while, but in the end, it ended up being a really good reading month. But before we go ahead and get on into the books, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as a little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new content. I post new videos every Saturday and every Wednesday and sometimes on Monday. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box for links to all of my social media, including my Discord and my Patreon. So I used to structure my wrap-ups where I would talk about my lowest rated books to my highest rated books, but I think I'm going to reverse that and talk about my highest rated books and then go to my lowest rated books, just because I want to start my videos off on a more positive note. But if you're looking for like specific star rating reviews, I will go ahead and put all of that information and timestamps down below. The first book I'm going to be talking about is Malice by John Gwynne. This is book 1 in his adult fantasy series, The Banished Lands, and I have a full review for this, so I'll go ahead and post that up in the cards if you're interested in watching it, as well as a live show that I did with Kissy Reads and Chase's Bookish Thoughts, so I'll put a link to that down in the description box if you're interested in checking any of those out. And this was my first time reading John Gwynne. This is his first published book. It's a book that I've wanted to read for the longest time, and I actually ended up really liking it. In this book, we follow a world known as the Banished Lands, and there has been this prophecy that there is going to rise a black sun and a bright star. So basically a good person and a bad person that will eventually have to duke it out at some point in this series. And we end up following a bunch of different characters' point of views as we are introduced to this world and the political machinations. We're introduced to who the antagonist is. We're introduced to a bunch of morally gray characters. And it's definitely a very complex story. The characters that we follow are Corbin, Verdis, Castle, and then a couple of smaller characters such as Cywin. And Corbin is definitely our main character. He's about 14 years old and he is coming of age. He's going through his soldier training to become a man in his village, and there's definitely more to his backstory than meets the eye that I'm sure will be expanded upon in further books. But I really like this book. I think the world was really interesting. I really enjoyed the battle scenes. I enjoyed just reading and being back in a world that had just those traditional epic fantasy feelings and those epic fantasy elements and the tropes and the kind of medieval setting. I really like that. I've heard that this has Celtic inspirations. I don't know much about that, so I can't speak to it, but if you like that, you might want to check this out. And I ended up giving Malice 4 out of 5 stars, and I do plan on reading Valor in March, and I'm very excited to continue the series. The next book I read was The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. This is Mistborn book number 4, or the first book in the second era Mistborn, and we end up following a world that takes place 300 years after the events of the original trilogy. We follow a whole cast of new characters. We follow a main character named Wax, who is an allomancer, and we follow a sidekick type character named Wayne, and then we follow a female character named Maireys, who is a university student who is really into like kind of detective and crime stuff and analysis. But this book definitely has a Western feel because our main character, Wax, was a sheriff type character who was working in this place called the Roughs, kind of just dealing with outlaws. But he is called back to the city of Ellendale because his uncle has died and he needs to take over managing his household, which is like a noble household in the city. But Wax has trouble giving up just his need to be out in the mists and to take the law into his own hands, and that kind of gets him into trouble in the noble setting of this story. This story revolves around a band of criminals that are breaking into places, taking people hostage and kidnapping women and taking them away. And someone that Wax knows ends up getting kidnapped, and he steps in to try and figure out what's going on, and then the story kind of goes from there. I really enjoyed being back in this world. I felt like the magic was definitely expanded upon. This book definitely has a more fun gunslinger type feel to it than the original trilogy, which was definitely more like bleak and depressing. This has a great sidekick. We have Wayne, who is just funny and humorous and doesn't take things too seriously but understands the stakes. So he was a great character to read about, and this book definitely has some great gunfights and it's just very adventurous. And I really liked the ending of the story because it ended on an awesome cliffhanger that has a lot to do with Wax. So I'm interested to see how that plays out in further books and how that's going to affect Wax. So definitely I'm excited to continue the series, and if you are a Sanderson fan or have read the original Mistborn trilogy, I do suggest picking this one up as well. I ended up giving The Alloy of Law 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm going to be talking about is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I want to read more classics this year because I completely failed last year, but one of my good bookish friends, Will, suggested that I pick this up, and I'm so glad I did because I had a great time reading it. But in Sense and Sensibility, we follow a family, and the father has died, and at that time, I'm assuming the laws were that women couldn't inherit anything. So the older son, who is actually a half brother to our two main characters of Eleanor and Marianne, ends up getting all of the money of this estate from his father. But his father asked him to take care of his half sisters and their mother, his second wife. And he doesn't. He doesn't give them any money or anything or take care of them. So they kind of end up getting ousted from where they're living and ends up moving to this small cottage in this different part of England, and they end up meeting a whole bunch of new people and getting involved in like the social setting of that town, and then the story kind of goes from there. So I will be honest, it did take me a while to really start to connect with any of these characters, but by the end of the book, I really connected with them. We have our older sister named Eleanor, and Eleanor is definitely more serious. She wants to take care of everybody, and she wants to especially take care of her younger sister, Marianne. And Eleanor is not someone that wears her heart on her sleeve. She is someone that kind of internalizes everything and would rather address other people's emotions than her own. And then we have Marianne, who is like the complete character foil to Eleanor. She wears her heart on her sleeve. She is willing to open up to everybody. She loves being social and kind of in the middle of the social circles. So it was really fun reading about those two sisters' dynamic and what happens to them when they are in London visiting. As with all of Jane Austen, there are some love interests involved. There are some shenanigans that happen, some miscommunications that happen, and some of it was just downright humorous. Some of these characters were just so funny to read about, especially Mrs. Jennings. So I just really appreciated this story because the characters were well developed, and then the humor. It is so subtle, but it is just there and it's great. And I had a great time reading this despite the fact that it took me a little while to get into it. So I'm definitely excited to continue reading more Jane Austen, and I ended up giving Sense and Sensibility 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished, I'm really not going to talk too much about, but I thought I'd put it on here, and that is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I read this every year with my English 1 students, and we finished it, and I do count it towards my Goodreads goal because I read it, and I'm going to say the same thing every time. I love this story. I think that it's definitely more complex than just two angsty teenagers. There are just so many morally gray themes in here about honesty and, being an obedient child and familial relationships that goes way beyond just the insta love between Romeo and Juliet. So I love those more complex themes in this play, and I also love the writing. William Shakespeare's writing is beautiful, but these teenagers, they're just way too dagger happy, and Romeo just whines all the time. So this one always gets a 4 out of 5 stars for me. The next book I'm going to be talking about is Post-Apocalyptic Paradise by Alice Darius Black. I do have a full spoiler-free review of this book if you're interested in checking it out. This is an independently published adult sci-fi apocalyptic story, and it follows a main character named Wyatt, and Wyatt lives in this apocalyptic world. There was a nuclear war between Russia and the United States, and it kind of annihilated the entire human race and the world as we know it. Wyatt goes on this journey not only for himself to uncover his past because he can't remember anything about himself or where he came from, but he also goes on a journey to uncover if there's any other people alive. And he ends up coming into contact with this kind of older scientist that gives him this cybernetic arm, and that aids him in dealing with the world that he lives in and the beasts that he has to come in contact with, and also aids him in dealing with the people he meets who are not the best people. I really loved the science aspect of this book. I thought it was really interesting. I really loved the cool fight scenes in here. I loved the development of the world. I really loved the development of Wyatt as a character. I felt like he had great character development. There were some things that I didn't like about it, such as how neat and tidy the ending was wrapped up. There was some issues I had with the prose itself that kind of pulled me out of the story and the dialogue, and sometimes it feeling unnatural to me. But this was a debut work, and all authors perfect their craft as they continue to write, as I'm sure our author will also, and I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. And lastly, we have a book that I think is going to be the hardest book that I need to rate in 2021. It is only January, and I am throwing it out there that this is probably the hardest book I've ever had to rate, and that is Semiosis by Sue Burke. Whew, this book. This is an adult science fiction book, and it follows a group of settlers that left Earth because Earth was in complete turmoil and settled on a planet called Pax. And on this planet, plants have developed. Pax is older than Earth, and I guess the evolution of plants have made them more sentient. And we have a type of plant, this bamboo, that the settlers eventually name Steveland. And he ends up literally becoming involved in their life and their governing and makes decisions and tells other plants how to grow things and how to act and what they should do and if they should aid the humans or like hurt the humans. So he kind of has authority over other plant life. And when I first read that this book had like sentient plants, I was like, that seems so cool. But I struggled so much with this book. To begin, I didn't realize that each chapter follows a different generation. So the chapters are super long. They're like 30 to 40 pages. So right away, I'm like, oh, those are really long chapters. But then it follows a different generation. So you are not with the same characters at all throughout the whole story. So right away, I was like, okay, well, I feel absolutely no attachment to any of these characters, and I really don't care. They were just characters to progress the story. So I had no attachment to any of the characters. The second thing that really jarred me from the story was the writing style, the prose. It felt like I was reading a textbook. There was no imagery, no figurative language. It was just dry and straightforward and just was not fun to read. It was so boring. And I ended up reading about 100 pages of this, and I was like, I feel like I'm wasting my time because I am not enjoying this. So I'm going to switch to the audiobook. So I switched to the audiobook, and I actually did finish the book with the audiobook. But I feel like if I had to physically read this, I definitely would have DNF'd because I was so bored. And at the beginning of the book, our settlers come from Earth to start this new kind of utopia, and they create this constitution like thing about living in peace. And literally, we have the first generation of settlers, and then we have the next generation. That entire thing is shattered because one of our characters murders another character. And our original generation was lying to the new generation the whole time. So they kind of set up this idealistic society and developed this commonwealth with this constitution to include all of these ideals that they didn't practice. So I was like, okay, is our author trying to show that humans suck and we're going to hurt each other no matter what we write on paper, that our society will never be peaceful because we are a fallen race? Like, I don't know if she was trying to communicate that. If she was, then she definitely did a good job. And, I agree. But I just felt like, what's the whole point of explaining how these people went to this planet and wanted to set up a society if literally just to have it completely fall apart within the second generation? There were things in here that were introduced that I really didn't understand why. There was rape. There was a generation where there was a serial murderer. Like, I don't understand why that was included. There is a ton of like adultery. Like, just don't even get married because your partner is going to cheat on you. There were just things in here that just were questionable morally wise that I didn't understand why it was there. And then we also had I guess it was a native race on this planet. I don't know if they were native or if they also came from a different planet called the Glassmakers. And I didn't realize that this was going to be a thing in this book. I thought this entire book was going to revolve around this sentient plant life and the human's interaction with the plant. That is a part of the book, but this actual story to me was about the Glassmakers, and I had absolutely no interest in this race. And it really, really, I feel like our author was trying to kind of show that on Earth, humans, when they meet like another race or another creature, they try to control it and domesticate it because that's what the characters tried to do in this book, and it just didn't work out. And then we have our plant, Steveland, who is trying to control and manipulate the humans. So I don't know if she was trying to like show this cyclical cycle between, higher order or higher intelligent beings trying to control other intelligent beings. So I know I just rambled, but this book just frustrated the heck out of me because I felt like the story wasn't clear. The themes weren't clear. The writing was boring. What I was promised with the plants was not enough to keep me captivated. And just the rape scenes and the murder scenes with having no consequences whatsoever just really bothered me. So I ended up giving this 1 out of 5 stars, which I am really, really sad about because I wanted to love it and I just didn't. I had a lot of problems with it. And there is a sequel to this. I think it's a companion novel, but I really I'm not going to pick it up. And I just did an unhaul video I'll put it up in the cards if you want to see it. And I haven't gone to the store yet, but this is going in my unhaul pile. Maybe someone else will read it and enjoy it way more than I did. And lastly, I did have a DNF, and that is We Free the Stars by Hafsa Faizal. This is the second book of The Sands of Araria, which is the sequel to We Hunt the Flame. I read that in December, and I have a full review of that if you're interested in checking it out. And I liked We Hunt the Flame. I didn't love it. I thought it was extremely tropey, and I was interested enough to read the sequel. And first things, this sequel is 600 pages long. And I was not expecting it to be this long because I am not that invested in the story and the world and the characters in order to spend 600 pages with it. So right away I was like, ugh. And then right away at the beginning of the story, we have that trope in YA where you have two love interests and something happens and they don't communicate. Like literally, the characters are standing right in front of each other and we're in their heads and they're like, oh, I can't tell him what I'm feeling. I can't tell her what I'm feeling. Like, no, tell them what you're feeling. We have that whole miscommunication trope. And oh, I was like, no, I can't. And then we have an unnecessary just teen drama conflict introduced where Nasir, the guy love interest, is in his room and out of nowhere, I'm telling you guys, out of nowhere, his old love interest shows up. Like she just pops into his room. Like I don't know where it came from. And then the new female love interest walks in and was like, oh, well, he must be with her now, so, he doesn't care about me, and I'm just like, "Oh my god, I can't do 600 pages of this teen drama that is wrapped up to be this, like, Middle Eastern cool fantasy. I can't, I can't." So, I read about 200 pages of it, and I just had to DNF it. I just need more from my books than that type of drama. It's just drama to have drama. I feel like if you are able to craft a good story with good characters and a good plot, you don't need unnecessary drama. So unfortunately, this was a DNF. All right, you guys, so that is it for my January wrap up. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. Also, let me know what you read in January, and I will see you guys soon in another video. Goodbye.